Okay, we can get started. First, I just want to say thank you so much to all the fourth years who've taken the time to come share some advice with us today, and congratulations to everyone who matched again. My name is Ashley. I'm a part of the mentorship committee with representation in rehab, and I thought we would allow our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right into the submitted questions.
Hey, Ashley, thanks so much for moderating. Hi, everyone. My name is Dorothy. I am a fourth year med student at Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine, and I matched at Hofstra Northwell over in Long Island, New York.
And the next, hi, my name is Lisa. I just graduated from St. George's University and I matched to Sinai, Baltimore.
Hi everyone, I'm Riley. I go to Rocky Vista University out in Utah, and I matched at SUNY Upstate.
How's it going, everybody? My name is David Pratt-Tape. I go to Lee Common Brayton. I just match at the Mayo Clinic in Florida.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josephine Monquo. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, and I just matched at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas.
Hey everyone, my name is Lucila. I'm a fourth year at Texas A&M School of Medicine in Houston, and I matched at Mount Sinai in New York.
And I think Trevor and Ekram may join us a little bit later. So we can start with the questions. Next slide, Allison, please. Okay, so someone asked, what strategies are there for making your application stand out without sounding cliche?
I could kind of touch on that. I think one of the biggest things is like understanding your brand and what you bring to the table. I think a lot of the times of what we go through medical school, we kind of try to check the boxes, but we don't get to really sit down and reflect on why does it actually matter and what the bigger picture is. And so when you're writing your application, you want to frame it from you want to frame it from perception to perspective, right? We're all sitting there, we're like, oh, we're really great applicants, but to the person on the other screen reading what we're saying, they have to feel what you're saying, they have to buy into what you're saying, and they also have to believe into what you're saying. And so that's what your track record of all the boxes you checked off is essentially what's going to really stand out. And for it to stand out, it has to be very personable, but also too, you have to be able to convey it in a way that it's important. And so a lot of nuances to it, but that's kind of an overall arching theme that I really understood from the get-go.
I agree. I also think it's really important to kind of make it that personal thing that David was talking about is getting someone who like doesn't know the activities that you've done really well to actually read your application and make sure they understand what you were actually doing in that role. Because I think for someone who knows you really well, they will be already able to know kind of the things that you've done, and someone who might not know you as well needs to be able to understand that application because a lot of the people you're applying to don't know your application already. So that's just a really good tip that I got. And I think it really helps me to solidify what parts of my like activities, because there's so many roles that we do in things as well, but you really want to highlight like what you really feel strongly about in your description of the activity that you did and things that you can actually talk about, because that's what you're going to be able to talk through in interviews as well.
Chiming onto that really is making time for your personal statement. If I had to tell myself, some real good advice during, the application process would be to start my personal statement a lot earlier. And I think a big part of that is kind of, like keeping, like a notes app on your phone and just writing down a couple of experiences that you feel like are really related to rehab or things that make you passionate about rehab, because that's going to make your life so much easier come, like August, maybe and July, when you start writing your personal statement and use that as your hook into making the reader really want to read your story a little bit further.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying about kind of making your application unique and like what you stand for. However, I will say I think it is important to check the boxes somewhat. Like, if you have a lot of volunteering, a lot of, research, whatever, not make everything about one thing. Try, because now you have to do 10 things, right? So try to mix it up a little bit to show that you can do maybe a little bit of everything. I think that does help you out. And then also making sure that you do include some PM&R related things in your application. I think that's really important because you want to show that you are committed to the field. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows to do that. And then lastly, I wanted to say make sure that your application is legible and easy to get through because these people don't have a lot of time to read through your application. So whether you use a paragraph format or bullet point format, it doesn't really matter as long as it's easy to read.
I just want to add one more thing. I know when I was applying and I went to like a lot of these webinars, and I went to ones that had some attendings in it, and they would always say like, I don't want to hear about like, oh, your sports injury that like kind of led you to PM&R, but I feel like people still did that in their things and they still matched. If it's like part of your story, it's okay to add it. Just don't highlight it to be like the entire focus of your personal statement because it might have been like an injury that happened like 10 years ago and you've done so much since then that could show and highlight so much more of your application than just that one injury. So if it happened, it's okay to add in like a sentence about it, but don't drag it on too much and make it the whole thing. And like kind of have that mentality going forward that you are so much more than just like that one event that happened. Even if that one event was what started you into PM&R, there's so much more that you've done now in the field.
Yeah, and I'll speak to just one small section that's hobbies. I know for our year, they sort of took that away, and I think that they're bringing it back for next year. But for hobbies, I would say that it's really easy to put down something like I like to cook. But from the advice that I've gotten earlier this year is that it's a lot more interesting and it grabs people a lot more if you say something like, oh, looking for the best pho recipe, or just something a little bit more interesting, something that's more hooking, and it just leads to a better conversation later on.
Okay, we can move on to the next question, which is how do I go about selecting letters of recommendation?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So I would say, of course, like with PM&R, I think it's a really good rule of thumb to at least have like one, maybe like one or two letters from a specific like physiatrist. It's not always like feasible to have all your letters, like I think what is it, at least three, maybe like 4 or 5 letters, like all from someone in PM&R. So don't feel like you have to have like you have to work with a physiatrist for so and so rotations to have that many letters. But I think kind of sounding cliche, but like what everyone says is like having someone who can vouch for you and who knows you a little bit well to write a letter for you. And I think like when you work with someone for maybe at least like a span of 2 weeks, I think that's also a good goal. And like for me, like something I would try to do on my rotations. I didn't really have all the answers either. Sorry. Okay, sorry. I think something that I would try to do on my rotations is if I knew I wanted a letter with a specific attending was I would ask them maybe like a week into working with them or something like that. Like, hey, like I'm applying PM&R. I would like to get a letter from you, a strong letter from you by the end of this rotation. Are there any things that you'd like to see from me to kind of help make that letter strong or help make that letter a really good one? By the end. And then that way you're asking one if they could do the letter. And then you're also checking off, okay, making sure that you can do all the things that you can do to perform well, or if there's anything that they want to see from you that they can add in that letter. I ended up having 2 letters from PM&R and then 2 from like a internal medicine physician. So these were people that I felt like I had worked well enough with on my rotations and who I had asked also and had worked with like for 1 or 2 weeks. And so I think just kind of like reaching out to those attendings or faculty that you know that you probably kind of like meshed well when you worked with them and who also feel comfortable writing you that strong letter. I would say those are good rules with them, and don't feel like your letters have to be all PM&R. And then a lot of the times when you do like your away rotations, right, I think something that I found was there was some continuity with the attendings that you would work with, and that's because they knew that students would need letters from these attendings that they worked with. And so if you know you're going on a away rotation and you know you want a letter from that rotation, I would say making sure after maybe like a couple days or a week after working with the attending, maybe going ahead and asking them that question and seeing if they can write that letter as opposed to waiting to the end where it's like you didn't know their requirements or their expectations or something like that. And then the letter is not as strong.
Yeah, and I'm going to speak to the part after you ask them. I think it's important to obviously establish that relationship and everything that was just spoken to. But as far as afterwards, attendings are super busy, especially during URAS season. They're going to be writing letters for pretty much all the students that come through because everyone's asking for them, which is great. And it's super nice of them. And it helps them a lot if you come up with maybe a few 3 to 4 bullet points of things that you think you did super well on during that rotation and that they may have seen. Like if you did a presentation on some like 5-minute thing, add like make that a bullet point, put a few other things in there. If you helped mentor a 3rd-year student while you're on a 4th-year rotation, put that in there, and then put in some other maybe leadership things or topics that you may have gone over, and just send them an email and say, hey, thanks again for agreeing to write my letter. Here's a few things I thought I did well on, and if you want to speak to them in your letter, you can. Thanks so much. And it also helps to just remind them as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything Josephine and Riley said. I think one of the biggest things too, at least the one thing that worked for me, is just shooting your shot. I think when we're on a rotation and we're kind of like, I don't know if they like me, maybe they like me, maybe I shouldn't ask, maybe I should ask, just ask. Like if they say no, just wear it and keep it going, like on to the next. So I think one of the biggest things is you'd be surprised how many attendings don't outwardly show their emotion of how impressed they are about you, but when they put the pen to the paper, it actually really, really, really looks good. So I mean, some of the letter writers that I had, probably with attendings that, maybe 50-50 shot, but it came up in interviews saying that they like wrote amazing things. So it's not always more than meets the eye. So just shoot your shot. And if they say no, move on. If they say yes, get it going. So I'm a big advocate for always advocating for yourself. So always ask.
I want to add one thing. I think Josephine kind of touched on this a little bit, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter like their title if you're asking like the program chair or the program director for a letter, if they didn't know you as well as like maybe one of the other attendings did. And you really want that person who knew you on like a personal level and kind of really got to see those things working for you, than just like someone who has a big name and title to them, because what's in the letter means so much more than just the name who wrote the letter sometimes. So I think it's really important, like ask the people you genuinely feel like you connected with, because they will be the ones who can actually speak to who you are in that letter for you.
Our next question is, what is the significance of signaling, and does it make sense to apply outside of geographic preferences?
I can start with this one. At least in my experience, the majority of my interviews were within my geographic preferences. I did get a couple outside of the geographic preferences, but not that many. So, I mean, I think it depends. You kind of have to play with your numbers and also depending on like how you feel, how competitive you are. But I feel like it is still worth applying outside of geographic preferences, but knowing that probably the majority will be within your geographic preference.
3 matches for Panama this year.
I'd also say check with program coordinators on some of this, because a lot of the away rotations that I did, the program coordinators, I would ask them like, hey, do you guys still want me to signal you even though I did an away rotation here? And the data for our season wasn't truly out and enough to like guide their decisions on it either. And a lot of the places that I did rotations at, they wanted signals to them as well. So just keep that in mind when you are choosing where to signal and where not to signal. it might matter where you did your away rotations. A lot of them were like, well, you could have done an away rotation with us and not liked us and not actually want to come here. But if you signal us, that also shows that you still want to come. So it can kind of be a little bit of a numbers game as well. But I do think it's important. And then for the geographic preferences, some of the areas are quite large. So for me, I matched in Sinai, Baltimore. I talked to the program coordinator when I rotated there, and I was like, hey, your geographic preference goes from like Maryland all the way down to Florida. And that's a giant area of the United States. So I was like, do I still need to like, if my geographic preference isn't there, but I signal you guys, is that still okay? And she was like, yeah, totally. We understand that that area is really large and that kind of can't fit in with that. So it does go program to program. And I think it's nice if you can have like a very casual conversation about it with a program coordinator while you're there, that it might be helpful.
I think a big significance is actually using the signals and the geographic preference. I know some of my like counterparts, like I know through the grapevine and through friends and things, like some of them opted out of using geographic preference, and it kind of showed when it came to the interview trail. But essentially what you're saying is I'm cool with going anywhere, but I have no preference. And so it's like a 50-50, like good and bad thing. So I'd say if you have a geographic preference, like definitely put it. And if you all have like signaling programs that you actually really want to go to, like signal them. Like don't try to think too hard about it. But in the event that you end up signaling and geographic preference a program, like they're gonna know. I remember I went to an audition where I signaled and I geographic preference, and the PD said it like right to me. He's like, "Oh, I see you geographic preference and you signal." It's like I did. So they actually look at it, they actually take it to account, and it obviously helps your case, especially too. That's the place that you're trying to go to.
Our next question is, what are the biggest factors that you believe helped you match?
I think looping back on Lucila's answer earlier, the fact that kind of like I invested in myself in many realms that were involved in PM&R. So she mentioned a well-rounded application, things like leadership opportunities, publications that don't necessarily have to be research. We can talk about it in a little bit. And I think one of the biggest recommendations was early exposure to PM&R. Granted, I am an outlier in that though, because I didn't truly find out about PM&R until the end of my third year rotations. But the point being said is, the moment you find PM&R is that you invest, a lot of your time like in it. It goes to show in your application. So kind of like looping back on publication part of it. So I do have some research coming back from a little bit of my undergrad, a little bit of my first and second year of medical school, but none of those were necessarily PM&R related. The important thing is that you know how to explain that during your interviews and kind of say, hey, how's it related to PM&R, or like what you learned just working on that research project. That said, though, there are many ways to be involved. If you're not much of a research heavy person, you could sign up for the AAP MSc, and I know they have a physiatry and motion publication that they roll out. I believe every I think 3 times a year or something like that. And you could write about things that interest you within the field of PM&Rs and have the research related. It could be something, maybe a patient encounter that inspired you a little bit, or maybe an up and coming, rehab bit of technology that you could see kind of like evolving over the next 10 years, something like that. I also involved myself in the Philippine American Physiatry Association, during which I was able to interview a couple of some PM&R legends, and that also like paved the way for a lot of meaningful conversations during my interviews about how that inspired my journey to PM&R. So finding those organizations that really help you be as involved as possible in the way that you want to. And then one other thing too is student leadership. I know for a fact that Representation to Rehab is actually about to roll out our student leader applications in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. There are a lot of opportunities to be involved in Representation to Rehab, and many committees we have available, and so that definitely was brought up during interviews as well. So as well rounded as possible. And I do know that Trevor just hopped on the call, so. Ashley, if you go ahead and introduce Trevor.
Yeah, welcome, Trevor. If you want to explain where you go to med school and then where you matched. Congrats again, by the way.
Thank you. Sorry for joining late, y'all. We also had like a post-match meeting for at my med school for couples matching, and I couples matched, so I was trying to help them as well. But yeah, I'm Trevor. I go to Vanderbilt Med School in Nashville, and I matched at Stanford for PM&R, and my fiance applied I am and also matched there for at Stanford.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next question, which is how do you go about choosing the number of programs to apply to and rank?
I think this question, like, I would say, so like, there's that dem or that chart on what is it, NRMP or ERAS or whatever, that like that curve that you can like look at your statistics maybe and then see like how many programs people apply to. Personally, for me, I looked at that thing and I was like, well, I mean, there are people who still go unmatched and meet all these things. And like for me personally, I was looking at my like qualifications, my like how well-rounded I was, and I was feeling like decently like confident, but at the same time, I think you can never be too confident, I think, in this process just because of how unpredictable the match is. And so I think I ended up applying to more programs than I definitely needed to. But I think that was partially like looking at like things like my step two score, which I'll be honest, like wasn't as high as I like would have wanted it to. And so I think that altered like how many programs I applied to. And then just like feeling confident within myself as far as like my application. And so I think you'll just have to like look within yourself and determine like, okay, if I don't really have a certain geographic like preference, like am I okay with going anywhere? I know some people who are like literally like if I don't match in the Midwest, like I don't want a job at all. And so that will alter how many programs you apply to. But I yeah, I would say like looking within your statistics, talking to your mentors and also seeing like, okay, maybe like this is like what my application looks like. Do you think I should apply outside of this geographic radius and all these different programs? Even if I'm not really interested in going there, because some people would rather, have a job anywhere as opposed to being in a specific subset. And for me, location was really important to me. But I also was like, I think I would rather like match somewhere than like, go unmatched or something like that. And then as far as like ranking programs, I think like 20 was the max that you could rank. And so I ranked the programs that I interviewed at. I know that there are some people who like didn't rank all the programs that they interviewed at. And I think you just have to be like within yourself, like if you're ranking a place, like you should be okay with going to that place. God forbid any of you ever fall like super low in your rank list. But in the event that happens, like you want to be okay and be satisfied with the place that you're going to. And so like I think like considering the number of programs that you rank, I think that depends on like the places that you interview at. And I would just recommend like, I mean, ranking like at least the ones that you definitely want to go to. But if you have the amount of, if you have the number of slots or if you have like the funds, like just rank all the programs that you interviewed at because I mean, you never know which ones you'll end up at. And then like, yeah, rank all your prelims and rank all your programs.
Just to add on, I think a great resource is your Dean of Student Affairs. So they can usually like tell you who in your school has applied to your specialty and kind of the number of programs that they've applied to in the past. And then you can like they usually can tell you like, oh, this person had a, I don't know, 250 whatever on their step two, and this is kind of their profile. They won't tell you who the person is, but I just think that that can be really helpful. I know that helped me a lot. And then also just talking to if you know anyone that's graduated recently or matched recently from your school, you can talk to them. I think that's really helpful. But overall, like Josephine said, I think it's really a personal thing to choose how many programs you're going to apply to because it really depends on your overall stats, your profile, as in like, how many leadership positions do you have, like how much research do you have? That all kind of affects, I feel like, your profile. So, but I am more of like lean in towards spending more money because like was rather like I guess would rather be safe than sorry, but I probably applied to too many programs at the end of the day. But it just depends on kind of your personality and like what you're willing to risk, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think I would just try to get advice from mentors in your school. And then the same thing, I also think with ranking, when somebody once told me, like, would you rather go unmatched or rank the program that you interviewed at? So like, I think it just depends on your personality. I mean, if you really hate that program, then obviously like don't rank them if you really don't want to. But at the same time, would you rather be unmatched? I think it just depends on what you want. But lots of things to think about.
I came from a very so I'm a non-US IMG. So for me, like choosing the number of programs that I was going to be applying to was terrifying to me because I knew that I looked at the stats the year prior and it was a very small amount of people that are non-US IMGs that matched. So I was feeling like I just needed to kind of do whatever I could to kind of get my name out there. I never know who was going to read my application or who I would meet in certain places that could kind of help me get there. So I'm also on the thing, if you can afford it, apply as broadly as you can if you're unsure, because I think that you never know who's going to end up reading your application. You never know who you're going to end up meeting. And you never want to be like, oh, yeah, I didn't actually apply to your program, but I've met you. And some of the things like you might rotate at places a little bit later, or you might go to like AAPM&R, which is in November, and meet people there. And they're like, oh, did you apply? And you're like, no, I didn't. And then sending your application later in November is kind of a little bit hard to do. So give yourself, set yourself up for success in that and give yourself the best chances that you can.
Okay. Next question is, how did you decide which intern year programs to apply to?
For me personally, I wanted to stay close to home, stay in Florida. So I applied to all the ones in Florida just for the sole fact of it being geographically close. Not too much thought went into that one, but as far as like TY versus IM, if you're like a very like gun ho, like I want to do academic medicine at tip top program where they see the most complex patients, I'd probably steer you towards the IM prelim more than the TY. But if you're like, I want to learn also to not have such a hard time during intern year, even though TY would be a hard time as well, but just not as hard. Maybe TY would be more so your speed. And so it really depends on your personal personality, what you want to get out of it, too. Just like your circumstances, your situation of how you want to see your first year internship as.
For me, I was more strapped by the fact that I was couples matching and we were like targeting like a certain amount of big cities. So I think because of that, I couldn't afford to be too picky about TY versus IM. And I just kind of like went all in for like whatever programs were in that area, like geographically. And that also influenced like my answer to like the previous question of like number of programs to apply to. I definitely like over applied, just trying to play the numbers game and the couples match.
Yeah, I mean, people go about deciding which intern years to apply to. It's a very personal preference. If you want to stay close to home for a year, then you can do that. If you want to stay in like major cities that are near most of the programs you're applying to, because there's definitely a cluster of programs in New York and then cluster around Chicago, and so you can do TY pro or prelim programs around there. But yeah, it's pretty personal preference, and you can also check. A lot of the programs have their own feeder intern years. So you can reach out to coordinators and find out if there's an intern year that they recommend that's maybe already nearby. I had some interviews where they would do an intern year interview at the same time as the PM&R interview, and I just had to apply to it like way later in the season, and I was automatically considered to be able to match into that.
Yeah, I would agree with what everyone said, and especially with like the geographic preference. I would say something else that I learned on the process was the ratio of like TY program interviews, like or TYs that you apply to the interviews. Um, it was a pretty big difference. And so I would say if you're only applying to TYs, I would definitely recommend also doing some prelims, right? Because you remember when you're doing TY and prelim, you're not just applying against people who are applying PM&R, but you have the derm people, the anesthesia, and you have a lot of people who have similar experiences to you, if not a broader variety of experiences, right? And so you have to remember the kind of pool that you're competing against. And so I think a good rule of thumb is just to apply to both, like if they're within your radius, because yeah, I was a little shocked at like the number I applied to versus the number that I got, and I was like, wow, like these TYs are actually competitive. But like, so I think that's why it's important to like apply to both, at least if they're within your preference. And then something else that I learned from some residents as I was going through the process was like, if you got an interview from maybe like an advanced program that didn't already have the first year, sometimes you could just like send an email to whoever the like IM program director or someone at the department, if that was a place that you were maybe like really interested in, and send them an email asking them like, basically asking them for like a prelim interview for their IM program if it was a place that you're really interested in. And it actually like worked for me for a couple of places like that. I got advanced program interviews, and so I think that's something that's worth a try if you are maybe like on the lesser end of prelim and TY invites. And if it's a program that you're considering, just reach out to their IM department. Maybe once you get an interview and say, yeah, this is a place I'm interested in. I know that you guys have maybe already sent out interviews, but is there any chance that I could be considered for one? And just, I mean, the worst that they can say is no. And then, I mean, you've at least tried at the end of the day.
Yeah. And something just to quickly tack on to what Josephine was just saying. I didn't realize this, so maybe it's something that you all don't know as well. But if you match into advanced, but you don't match into a prelim year, the NRMP will tell you what city that's in, and there's usually like a bajillion spots available in SOAP, so you will get a prelim year or a TY year in SOAP for your advanced PM&R program, and it hopefully will be nearby if they tell you where the PM&R program is at. But if you have a TY or prelim program that you're really interested in, you definitely want to go there over anywhere else, apply to it and try to reach out and do the things like Josephine was saying and tell them that you are definitely interested.
Okay, next slide, please, Allison. The next set of questions are going to be about away rotations. Allison, can you go to the next slide, please?
I took over sharing because I don't think Allison was there. But can you see my screen now?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so what advice do you have on selecting and preparing for audition rotations, including the timing and number of applications?
I'd say send the application as soon as possible, as soon as it opens. That's kind of a good rule of thumb. The earlier you are, the better chance you have. The later you are, the lesser chance you have. Number of applications, that's kind of a personal question for you. It's like how much money and time and travel and expenses are willing to kind of upfront for it. And then selecting, that's also like a personal question as well. What do you value? Where do you want to be? What kind of geographical areas you want to unlock, and kind of connections you want to make? And really, at the end of the day, foresee yourself potentially being at, since the majority, I feel like, will match in either one, the places that they audition at, or their top 5 for the most part. So kind of keeping those things in mind.
As far as timing and number of applications, it really truly varies on kind of like what everybody's saying, or like playing your numbers. But I would honestly aim for at least 3, ideally 4, and a maximum of 5. Like do 5 if you ever really truly want it, but like it becomes very kind of tiring to that point. And I know because I did 5 and I was very tired by the 5th one. But that said, I think, doing 3, like say, you start in July and then you go to August, September, by the time you start getting your interviews in October, then that's more than enough experience for you to actually share during your interview process. I also did I also did some auditions during that interview season. So the October, November up to the January period. And it's not impossible. Majority of the time, people are very understanding on auditions during interview season. So when you say, hey, I have a couple of interviews coming up on a certain day, they literally sometimes give you the day off or let you come in a little bit late, a little bit earlier. Because they're very supportive of your journey to PM&R. That's what we're all here for anyways. And then as far as timing, so for my school, I ended up starting my audition rotation, my first one a little bit later on, so sometime in August. But if you have the opportunity to start it in June or July after dedicated, I'd 100% recommend you doing so. That way, you're able to get some good PM&R letters of recommendation that was kind of earlier alluded to on time and way before the ERA season starts. Yeah, that's what I would say.
I agree with what everyone's saying. I will say though, I personally only did 2 rotations in PM&R. I would say based on like my friends, I guess, most people did 2 or 3 PM&R rotations, but I know that it depends on school and everything else. So just kind of take that however you want. And then timing, I also agree. Try to get them in if you can before ERAS. But I also have plenty of friends that did them during interview application as well. I just think it depends on like if you can get PM&R letters of rec beforehand, like without doing the away rotations, or if you need the PM&R rotations to be able to get the letters of rec. So just think of those things. And then something else that I wanted to add. So I'm from Texas. I did one of my away rotations in California, and I think that definitely unlocked that West Coast for me. So just FYI, if that's something that you're interested in, I think the West Coast is very much like you need to show interest somehow or have some sort of stable connection to that region to be able to unlock. That at least is my experience as well as like some of my friends' experience. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's said already. But like to echo like Lucila's advice, I am from California and I only did 1 away rotation and I did it in California because I've been trying to go back for like since trying to apply to med school. So yeah, the West Coast I think is just kind of notorious for being a little bit harder to crack into if you don't have strong connections. But this is one way to do it. And I only did 1 away rotation, but did like 2 home program rotations. And at varying times. So yeah, you can totally do it during ERAS. Yeah.
I have one more thing to add, just kind of like a pro tip. Don't do a high caliber program your first one ever. When you like are at a program and you're doing an audition for the first time, you're kind of just getting acclimated to it. I highly suggest not doing like a high caliber program straight up, and you're seeing like 5, 10 patients, and that's like your first introduction to like PM&R inpatient. So unless you've had experience in inpatient, then by all means go for it. The world is yours. But I do suggest like kind of easing your way up to that caliber as far as like really showing what you can do and really impressing the staff. I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to auditions, because at the end of the day, you want an interview and they want to take you as a resident. So just pro tip, just throwing it out there.
Another thing to watch out for too is there are actually some PM&R audition rotations that offer their spots outside of VSLO. So definitely it's such a quick like Google search too. If this is a program you're like looking into, search up the program and put away rotations and it'll pop up. Another one too is if you're kind of looking for audition rotations and you just want to add a little bit more PM&R experience in there, but can't afford to actually fly out and do the audition. On VSLO, there were a couple of online PM&R opportunities. I didn't do any of those, but those are definitely available if that's something you want to look into. And those are usually around 2 weeks.
I'll add one thing. I know. Oh, sorry. I keep touching my screen. So depends on your application too for selecting the number of away rotations that you do. I had some friends that knew that they had some red flags on their things, whether it was low scores or like a leave of absence or something. And so they were like, I don't know if I'm going to get through some of those filters that people might use. So I want to do as many away rotations as I possibly can. And she ended up doing like a couple 2 week rotations as well as some 4 week one rotations. And I think that can help you if you do have some red flags on your thing. And it's something to be mindful of that like away rotations truly give them an opportunity to see you that may not stand out on paper. If you had a really bad testing day and that stuff happens and it's okay, but just try to make up for it where you can.
And our next question is, how long did it take to hear back from the audition rotations that you applied to? And when is it appropriate to follow up?
Each program is so different. Some of them will get back to you the next week or that night even, and then others you'll never hear from ever again, and it's just money in the wind. So it's super frustrating, but as far as when to follow up, if it's a place that you're really interested in and you still have gaps to fill, be aware of your schedule so you can let the coordinator know, like, hey, I have a gap to fill here. I sent in this application. I'm super interested. And you can put in a little blurb about why you're interested or something that, connects you to that area or to that program. But I probably followed up with my VSLO apps, the ones that I was really interested in. I don't know. I would say, gosh, probably around like May, June timeline. Especially because at that time I already had a July rotation set up and established, and I wanted to fill in some more gaps. So that was when I followed up.
Yeah, I would say if it's getting like close to like maybe it's like a month, maybe like a month and a half out from the ideal date that you like apply to rotate, or maybe like after a month after submitting your application for the rotation, like it's never like a bad thing, I think, to just like email whoever the coordinator is. They normally have the info listed on VSLO, and just say like, hey, I'm interested in this place. I submitted my application for these dates. I just wanted to see if I just wanted to know when I should expect to hear back or something like that. And maybe they'll even just email you then. I know, yeah, one of the places I applied to had just emailed me then and said like they filled up their slots. So honestly, if I had never emailed, I probably, like Riley would have said, like it would have just been in the wind. So like sometimes you just have to like reach back out to them if you're really interested. And then this is kind of like not really with this question, but I would say if there's a place that you are really interested in rotating in, and maybe they offer you, because you can apply for like multiple dates for one location, and maybe they give you the set of dates that you already like accepted for another rotation or something like that, and you want where you're still interested in rotating with them. You can email the like coordinator or whoever the physician is who runs the elective, and just kind of mention your situation, like you're interested in rotating at this place. Unfortunately, these dates that they gave you don't line up, but you were really interested in so and so set of dates. And one of the places that I rotated with in Texas actually had adjusted my schedule to like fit me in a different in those set of dates that I had asked for, and that was probably just because I had just asked them as opposed to just like declining the invitation that they gave me. And so I think if you end up getting like timing or dates that you're not really ideal with your schedule, don't be afraid to just like ask like if there's any way they can move you around, because sometimes there's like other adjustments, or they can put you with another faculty member or somebody for that rotation.
I just wanted to take a moment to remind people to apply to the underrepresented minority scholarships that a lot of places have. Representation in Rehab has a list, so don't forget about that. I think a lot of our current M4s apply to those, so including myself and Trevor.
If you had to go through audition and interview season again, is there anything you would have done differently or wish you had done?
I think one thing I wish I knew when I was going through a ways was that come November, December, and January, you're gonna get interviews. And if you're on audition and you're like asking for time off, it's fine ever so often. But if it's like becomes a recurring theme, it could get a little dicey. Um, it was just more my anxiety more than anything about that. But just kind of a heads up, like if you're going to do an audition in November, December, January, like chances are you'll probably be doing interviews. And if you're at your like dream program and you gotta say, hey, like I gotta step away for like 5 times, like it starts to get questionable, you know. So just kind of keeping that in mind as you're going through this process is super important.
I absolutely agree with that. If your school offers like virtual elective opportunities, for example, I would say schedule it around those times. And that's what I did for the December timeframe. And I was able to accommodate most of my interviews during that. So I basically same thing what David said. Like I had that like anxiety of asking for like, like too much like days off, and I didn't want to, rub it off the wrong way. So definitely take advantage of those. I think another thing too is I wish I could have gone to more mock interview opportunities, or even like, grab a fellow med student friend and then maybe we could, bounce off questions together. Because one thing I did find was even if I went to, a couple of like mock interview sessions, like honestly, it feels like nothing can really truly prepare you for like, that first week or those first 2, 3 interviews that you actually get. And, sometimes it's just like the shell shock of it. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I had this, answer crafted up in my head. I've been thinking as I showered and all of that. But then, when it comes to the real deal, like, it's a lot of, I think just kind of like nervousness, like showering upon you. But to avoid that, I think the more you practice, the better. And I think there are fellow organizations that are starting up mock interviews as well. If apart in addition to AFC PM&R, I think there were a couple as well during that season. So definitely sign up for those. And like I mentioned, grab a friend, a fellow med student friend. You guys are definitely going to be benefiting each other in that respect. And then the last thing too is having really stable Wi-Fi connection. I don't want to out my Wi-Fi provider, but they were definitely not good in the November, December season. So if you have the chance and say, you're doing auditions, so you're at an Airbnb, like really make sure the Airbnb has like, 325 Mbps, like that fast Wi-Fi speed and in their description. So you don't ever come across that issue.
Yeah, I second Dorothy on the Wi-Fi. That was an issue for a couple of mine, but it ended up fine. Something else I'd say to keep in mind is that while you're at an audition, they're definitely like paying attention to you and they want to see, your stuff, what you got. But at the same time, pay attention to them, see if it's a program that you actually like and if it does jive with your personality, with your style, with things that you want, if you get along with the people there, if you like the system that they have set up for call and everything else. And do your best to just be yourself. I think we get lost in trying to impress people so much, and it's so much lower stakes than I thought it would be. You're never going to walk away from an audition. They're going to be like, wow, that was the best neuro exam I've ever seen, because they just don't really care about that as much because we're learning and they know that. So just be yourself, have a good time, and see if you like them also.
A couple of things that I noticed too is that like there's never going to be a perfect program for you out there, and there's always going to be some like drawbacks to certain things, but it's if you would feel like kind of weighing those pros and cons, and do you feel more comfortable with the pros and the cons of a program? And if you do, like that's a good thing. And keeping those things, like I didn't necessarily do that during when I was on my away rotations. And then when I came back to interview times, I was like, oh, I can't really remember how I felt about this at the time when I was actually truly in it. So if you're doing away rotations, keep notes about things, like keep notes about things that you like, things that you didn't like, because come rank list time, it just all feels like a blur. And when you're trying to compare these programs, you're like, well, all programs have call schedules, but like, what did I truly feel like the residents felt like during their calls and how they felt as well? Because that makes a big deal and a big impact on you during residency. Another thing I wish I did was I wish I like took notes on some patient encounters that really spoke to me a little bit more during away rotations, because I was asked a lot of times about like, tell me about a time you had a patient about this. And I wish I had more like concrete things to go off of. I still was able to speak to them, but I just felt like it was totally my own anxiety in that as well, of feeling as confident as I could in some of those. I don't know if I was. And I was always like looking back on it, feeling a little bit things. So I think it's just important to take notes during your away rotations about your feelings, your experiences, and all of that.
You can go to the next slide. Thank you. How did you handle scheduling interviews around audition rotations, making a good impression, and standing out during interviews?
I would say, as far as like scheduling interviews, so when they first like started coming, like it was maybe like kind of slow, and I was just like, oh, okay, I'll just like, my calendar was like so free. I was like, oh my God, I'm so grateful to have an interview. So I just scheduled it anyhow, or like for any day. But then like when they, more interviews like started coming, I would realize like, wow, like I'm not like putting this in my calendar, like I'm not organizing this. And so you start to realize like, oh, there's like conflicts between things. And so I would like, after you schedule an interview, like I would immediately like put it either in your physical calendar, like put it in your like phone calendar, or like write it down somewhere so that when you like start getting like interviews that are coming like on the same day or same time period or something like that, you can easily know like, okay, this day I'm not available. And like when you have like Thalamus or ERAS or something like that, definitely put your notifications on, and make sure that you're able to like schedule like that ideal date that you want to have that interview during. For me, my last audition rotation ended like the first week of November, and so I got lucky that I was able to schedule all my interviews after that, because kind of like we talked about, like I didn't want to miss too many days and I didn't want to seem like uncommitted or anything. But I know that can be difficult if you are doing like an audition in November or December, and so I think making sure that your program knows ahead of time and that they're like willing to be flexible with you in those dates. And then also trying to like schedule them in the afternoon if you can too, right? Like, so if you have a clerkship or rotation, or you're going in for your audition, maybe if you can at least like round with them in the morning maybe, and then in the afternoon step away for your interview or something like that. Because I think that'll also help you make a good impression at your interview, right? You'll be fresh and ready and alert in the afternoon, but you also make a good impression with the program that you're doing the audition at. And then as far as like standing out, making a good impression, I mean, kind of sounds cliche, but like, don't forget to just like be you. Like, I mean, I sometimes like can come off as like the sarcastic, like humorous person to people. And I think that sometimes when I would talk during my interviews, occasionally there would be like a laugh or something, or like a joke would be made or something, and like people could see that. Like, I mean, try not to be too like stiff, like the same way that, they're interviewing you, you're also interviewing them. You want to see like, are these people like serious, right? But is there like a personality? Like, do they want to know you? Like, do they really want to get to know you? Like, are they just like pimping you, asking you like a ton of questions? Are they actually like, invested in your interests? Have they read your application? Things like that. And so I like stuck to my values. Like, I emphasized the things that were important to me. When I was asked questions, I talked about knowing your leadership opportunities, knowing your application really well. If there's anything that you put on your ERAS application, always remembering that that is fair game to be asked during interviews. And so when they ask you, like, I saw that you volunteered at so-and-so marathon, what did you learn from that? Or tell me about your strengths in so-and-so leadership position. You have to be ready to like talk about those things and talk about them with passion also. So it seems like something that you're really interested or invested in. And I think that kind of helped when I would talk about like my experiences with either like the Student National Medical Association or efforts around DEI, like that was all on my application. But when I talked about it in interviews, like people could also tell like those are things that were important to me. And I think that really helped make me stand out as well. And so just remember your values, what's important to you, and making sure that you showcase those strengths about yourself too, I think, during interviews.
I just wanted to add on for as far as scheduling interviews, make sure that you at least try to have like a different email just dedicated to ERAS. I think that really helped. I highly recommend Gmail. I felt like the Gmail app like was so much faster than the Apple one. I would get notifications there before the Apple like email app or whatever. So I would definitely recommend that. That way you can get on top of scheduling your interviews. And then like Josephine said, like putting it immediately into your Google Calendar, Apple Calendar, because once it comes like I think October or November-ish, you might get multiple interviews in one day or whatever, and you're just like struggling to like remember what you have. So just remember to do that so to stay organized. And then yeah, good impression, same thing, just that she said, just making sure you're smiling, It's kind of hard because this is like Zoom is hard to stay super smiley all the time and like having good posture all the time. But you know, try your best, especially when your camera's on, making sure you're dressed well, making sure your background is clear, clean, as crisp as possible, just to make sure everything looks professional. But I think the best thing to do is just, yeah, being yourself, smiling and making sure that they know that you're happy to be there.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything and Josephine and Lucila said. The interview definitely goes both ways. You are interviewing them as well to see if they're a good fit for you. So totally echo that. As far as like scheduling interviews, I'd highly recommend Gmail as well. Like Lucy said, there's actually a way I set up my phone where like when you get an email, it texts my phone too. So just to like set it up so you like know exactly when you get like an interview invite. So then you can like go straight to the Gmail app and kind of schedule the stuff from there and kind of add it to your calendar really quick. So I would highly recommend. I do not remember how to do that, but I like just YouTubed it and it was like pretty simple.
I also agree with what everyone's saying so far. I did find though that a lot of the interviews ended up kind of being that like end of November, beginning of December time frame. So like Dorothy said earlier, if you can schedule an online elective during that time, like that's the best time to do it. I remember like that those like 3 weeks, by the end of it, I was exhausted. So if you can kind of get some of your interviews done earlier, like I had some of my prelim interviews all the way at the end of January, and I was dying to get through those. So if you can kind of schedule them earlier, that fatigue will really hit you hard in interview season. So just something to keep mindful of.
And I
Okay.
think one last thing. Oh, sorry, Ashley. You're good. Go for it.
I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead, David.
Oh, no worries. I was gonna say one last thing about standing out during interviews is like now's the time as a third year to start reflecting on why you're so special. Like think about like why you're actually doing all these things and why it actually matters in the grand scheme of everything. Because like when you reflect and you understand your purpose and like how to answer questions, it really shows when you're like talking in an interview because you like speak with confidence, you speak with a track record, you've been there, done it, and you're going to do it as a resident. So it's like it's not a question of like oh, what do I say? It's more so like, let me just tell you my story. And if you like it, you buy into it, let's make a deal now. So, like, for you all as third years, like, you're doing research, you're doing leadership, you're doing community service, you're doing all these things. But if you can't convey that to me in an interview, then I don't want to say it doesn't mean anything. It means something, but you didn't do yourself justice, right? And so when it comes to the interview, you want to stand out, start thinking about it now and why it matters. So then it shows on the paper and it shows in the person. So that's one of my biggest things that I suggest.
Okay, the next question is, do you have any advice on networking, including during audition rotations and interviews?
Okay, during audition rotations, I would say definitely get to know the residents. I'm sure some are more open than others, but usually everyone is super open to talk. It's really important to just get their perspective on their experience, and whatever questions you have for them, because they're the ones that are going through it, right? So do that. I also would say to keep up with them afterwards if you're really interested in the program. I think that continues to show interest. You never know if, you know, they're talking to any leadership or whatever. You never know. So you might as well keep those contacts. And then same thing with interviews. Usually during interviews, some of the programs will have socials. So same thing, just like keeping up with the residents that you meet during those socials if you're interested in the program. And then networking in general, I highly, highly, highly recommend going to AAPM&R if you can, because like I met so many people in person that I had met through Zoom from the programs, a lot of the programs that I had interviewed at, and I felt like it not only helped me, but also like maybe them. I don't know. Maybe that's just how I felt, but I think it's really nice to meet some of the people that you meet in Zoom in person. You get kind of a different feeling. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
I'll second that going to AAPM&R. And like when you go, say yes to everything. Like you might know fellow med students there and they're like, hey, do you want to come to this event with me? Say yes, go to it. It might be exhausting and it might like drain your social battery to be there for that weekend, but it truly has like the best impact on you. Like I know I spent a lot of time with Dorothy when I was at AAPM&R and I went to like everything with her and I got to know so many different people and it like she really helps me kind of feel out and like meet all these more people and like I got to do new experiences from it and get on different committees and different things that you can get involved in. So really just go and say yes. And like networking, the biggest thing is like shoot your shot, do it. You can't like no one's ever going to say no to you and be like, you're annoying me, don't talk to me. They're all going to be really nice because they know that when they go to AAPM&R, like they're going to have students approach them. And I remember like I saw some program directors there that I had applied to programs and I was like, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Lisa, this is what I'm interested in, and just do it.
Our last question is, what features of programs did you value when creating your rank list?
Yeah, I think this is so personal. I think each person has things that are super important to them. And I know one thing for me was geographic region. So that was sort of a big thing that I put into my own rank list. And then also just the curriculum or the schedule or the different access to things within PM&R that they had. Because I'm pretty open to all things PM&R right now. And so I didn't want to go to a place that was really focused on the sports track and kind of only pumped out sports PM&R people. Or vice versa for like spinal cord injury and brain injury. I wanted a place that would sort of show everything. And so that's sort of how I created my rank list. And then obviously vibes, I think is super important, whether it's during the interview day or whether you did a rotation there. Your gut instinct is going to tell you a lot more about a program than any giant pro con list of numbers and things inside of Excel. Because I think as important as all those little nitty gritty details are, just how you feel about a program at your base instinct is going to be how you're going to feel, you know, when you open the letter or the email on match day.
Okay, well, that was our last question for today. If anyone has anything else left to add or any other questions, feel free to unmute. But thank you so much, you all, for being here and sharing your advice with us. I think Rachel has a question.
Hi, yeah, I do. First of all, again, thank you for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Super helpful. I had kind of sort of two quick questions. One was specifically more for Trevor. So I'm also looking to couples match, and I just wondered if you kind of kept your like line of applications like categorical programs. I know you guys talked about like what to do in terms of like if you got an advanced program but not your like transition year and how that worked, but kind of wondered what your thought process was on that because it's horrifying. I can wait on the second question if you want to answer.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. My partner and I were definitely prioritizing being together. So like we definitely weighted categorical places pretty heavily. Um, but like when you apply for preliminary programs, you get like signals for them as well. Um, and honestly, like I don't know if that's good or bad because like you can't like just like send all your signals to your like your top two cities because you like want to play the game and like do like one here, one there, one there. So that made it like pretty frustrating. Um, so I ended up matching in like an advanced place, and fortunately, my intern year will also be like in like San Jose, which is like very close to Palo Alto. Um, but yeah, I like kind of tried to play the game and like sending a letter of intent like pretty early to like both of those programs, like, hey, like I love y'all. Please love me back, you know, and my partner is applying IM, like it'd be great if you talked to like their program director, or sometimes they offer to like straight up talk to the other PD. Um, but yeah, I think that is a very reasonable question and would definitely weigh like categorical like pretty heavily for that reason.
Okay, thank you. That's super helpful. And then I just had a quick second question about the AAPM&R conference. Um, I guess like what's the way that you guys went about it? Did you go through your schools? Did you sign up independently? I mean, maybe I'm also a MSU Comm student, Dorothy. So if you know anything about that, that would be really helpful. But yeah, that's just my second question. So thanks again for your time.
Yeah, as far as AAPM&R, you can really go both ways. Honestly, like, so if your school gives you research funding, definitely sign up for that. If you can. What I would say too, so as early, send me an email. I'll send it in the group me and then we can figure that out. But if you find like, any cool publication or research opportunities as early as now, that will definitely help with like crafting an abstract in time for submission deadlines. And I will say too, so with AAP, big conference like AAP, AAPM&R, AOC, PM&R, they have, the main abstract presentation deadline. And then later on, around like 2-3 months later, they have a late breaking abstract deadline. And that's what I signed up for because, kind of like the timeline that mended much better with the timeline for my publications. And so definitely watch out for those. So just because you're not able to get into those now doesn't mean you won't get into those later. There's definitely an opportunity there. And as far as AAPM&R goes, in terms of like, requesting time off, it really is school dependent. Fortunately for our school for Comet, it's rotation dependent. And so it depends on, like how, you speak to your preceptors, the residents who are involved in all of that. But we can definitely touch base about that. Thanks for asking that question.
Joanna?
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for this panel. It's been super helpful. I just wanted to ask, just regarding applications, like how do you go about selecting the number of applications you want to send out? Does anybody know, like on average, how many programs PM&R applicants apply to?
I can say that I have heard that the average is around 50 applications per applicant. I'm not sure how many you guys applied to. It's different since it was back in my day, but that's just what I've heard.
Yeah, so it really depends on your overall profile. We touched on this a little bit, but it really depends on like your stats. That's one thing. The other thing is like, I don't know how much exposure to PM&R you have, like what experiences you have there, and you can include in your application, how much research you have, how much volunteering you have. It just really depends on your profile and how much, like, I guess all of that weighs towards each program. But I would say try to touch base with your dean of student affairs, I think it is. They usually can tell you like how many programs somebody from your school has applied to in the past for PM&R. But yeah, I mean, I have heard anywhere, like at my school, for example, I'm at Texas A&M, we technically don't have like a home program. We have like one that's sort of associated, but not from Texas A&M. People at my school applied from anywhere before 40 programs to like 110 programs. So like it really just depends on your application.
Probably have time for one more question. So Moody.
Hi, yeah, thank you all for doing this. It means a lot. It's pretty inspiring to all of us. My question was for Lisa. As an IMG, would you advise yourself looking back on doing something differently that, you'd advise current applicants to look into, considering, our pathways as IMGs is a lot more different and at times a lot more difficult as well. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one thing that I wish I did was if I could have afforded it, I would have done a little bit more away rotations. It felt like a lot of my interviews came from those or came from like connections that I knew from that. So as finding out as early as possible and just maybe like expanding my reach of where I went to, I think was going to be like the biggest thing that helped me to kind of get some of those away rotations and finding out like if there was other ways to get away rotations. I didn't have VSLO, so I didn't have that resource available to me. So for me, it was a lot of like coordinating with things. And by the time and staying on top of it, because yeah, a lot of people don't respond to emails. It's a busy time for everybody. Even after like match happens for program coordinators, there's a lot for them to figure out. So it was kind of annoying, but I've never really had anyone tell me like, hey, you're emailing us too much. But I was just like staying on top of things because I wanted to make sure that I got everything. So I think doing away rotations and like networking was the best thing that I could have done for myself to help me match. And I think I don't know if I would do it differently in that way. Like I really did put myself out there the best that I could.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all so much.